Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The alarm clock on the bedside table blinked silently, its red digits reading 6:30 a.m. Joe stirred, their hand fumbling for the snooze button out of habit. Eyes still closed, they rolled over, burying their face in the pillow. The soft cotton against their skin felt like a comforting embrace, tempting them to sink back into the depths of sleep. But today was different. Today was important. With a groan, Joe forced their eyes open, blinking away the remnants of sleep. The weight of the impending presentation settled on their chest, a mix of excitement and anxiety swirling in their stomach. "Come on, Joe," they muttered to themselves, swinging their legs over the side of the bed. "Time to face the day." The wooden floor creaked beneath their feet as they padded towards the bathroom, yawning and stretching their arms above their head. The mirror reflected a disheveled figure, hair sticking up at odd angles, eyes still heavy with sleep. Joe reached for their toothbrush, going through the motions of their morning routine on autopilot. The minty taste of toothpaste helped to clear some of the fog from their mind, but the lingering effects of a restless night still clung to them like a stubborn cobweb. As they rinsed their mouth, Joe's gaze fell on the assortment of products lining the bathroom counter. Among them stood a familiar tub, or so they thought, in their bleary-eyed state. Without a second thought, Joe grabbed the container, unscrewing the cap with practiced ease. The scent that wafted up was slightly different from what they were used to, but in their pre-coffee haze, they barely registered it. Squeezing a generous amount onto their palm, Joe began to apply it to the underside of their wig. The texture felt a bit odd, stickier than usual, but they chalked it up to their imagination, or perhaps a new formula. As they positioned the wig on their head, Joe felt a strange tingling sensation against their scalp. They paused for a moment, brow furrowed in confusion, but the urgency of the day ahead pushed any concerns to the back of their mind.
"No time to fuss,"
Joe murmured, giving the wig a final pat.
"Gotta get moving."
Rushing through the rest of their morning routine, Joe barely glanced at their reflection before heading out the door. The familiar weight of the wig on their head felt comforting, a shield of confidence as they prepared to face the challenges of the day. The drive to work was a blur of traffic lights and fellow commuters, Joe's mind already rehearsing key points of their presentation. They pulled into the office parking lot earlier than usual, determined to have a few extra minutes to prepare. As Joe stepped out of the car, a gust of wind ruffled their wig. Instinctively, they reached up to adjust it, and that's when they first noticed something was amiss. The wig didn't budge. Frowning, Joe tried again, this time with a bit more force. Still nothing. A creeping sense of unease began to settle in the pit of their stomach.
"What the?"
they muttered, ducking back into the car to check their reflection in the rearview mirror. The wig looked perfectly in place, not a hair out of line. But as Joe tugged at it more insistently, they realized with growing horror that it was stuck fast to their head. "No, no, no," Joe whispered, panic rising in their chest. "This can't be happening." But it was. The realization hit them like a bucket of ice water. They had used Superglue instead of their usual wig adhesive. Joe's mind raced, trying to piece together how this could have happened. The DIY project from last weekend, the new tube of superglue they'd bought. It must have ended up mixed in with their bathroom supplies. "Stupid, stupid, stupid!" Joe berated themselves, hands shaking as they continued to probe at the wig. The sound of car doors slamming nearby snapped Joe back to reality. Colleagues were starting to arrive, and here they were, sitting in their car, on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. Taking a deep breath, Joe tried to calm themselves.
Okay, think. What are your options?
They couldn't very well rip the wig off, not without taking a good portion of their real hair with it. And they couldn't skip the presentation. It was too important, both for the company and for their career. With a sinking feeling, Joe realized they had no choice but to go into the office and face whatever consequences might come. Stepping out of the car, Joe smoothed down their clothes, attempting to project an air of confidence they certainly didn't feel. Each step towards the office building felt like walking to their doom. As they pushed through the revolving door, the familiar hustle and bustle of the office washed over them. The clacking of keyboards, the low murmur of conversation, the whir of the copy machine. All sounds that usually faded into the background now seemed amplified, as if the entire office was watching Joe's every move. "Morning, Joe!" a cheerful voice called out. Joe turned to see Sarah from accounting, her bright smile a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside them. "Oh, good morning, Sarah," Joe managed to reply, their voice sounding strained even to their own ears. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Are you all right? You look a bit off." Joe forced a laugh, waving off her concern. "Just a bit nervous about the presentation, that's all. You know how it is." "Oh, of course. But don't worry, you'll do great. I've seen your prep work and it's fantastic." Joe nodded, grateful for the encouragement, but also desperate to escape the conversation before Sarah noticed anything amiss. "Thanks, Sarah. I'd better get to my desk and do some last-minute reviewing." As Joe hurried towards their cubicle, they could feel curious glances following them. Was it just paranoia? Or were people really staring? Did the wig look unnatural? Could they tell something was wrong? Settling into their chair, Joe booted up their computer, trying to focus on the task at hand. But their thoughts kept drifting back to the predicament literally stuck to their head. The minutes ticked by, each one bringing Joe closer to the moment of truth. They rehearsed their presentation, went over their notes, double-checked their slides, anything to keep their mind off the wig situation. A knock on the cubicle wall made Joe jump. "Hey, Joe, ready for the big show?" It was Mark, their team leader, leaning against the partition with an expectant smile. Joe swiveled in their chair, plastering on what they hoped was a convincing grin.
As ready as I'll ever be, I guess.
Mark's brow furrowed slightly.
You okay? You seem a bit tense.
Just pre-presentation jitters, Joe lied, standing up and gathering their materials. I'll be fine once I get in there and start talking. As they walked towards the conference room, Joe could feel Mark's eyes on them. Did he suspect something? Had he noticed the wig? Joe's palms began to sweat, and they gripped their folder tighter to hide the trembling. The conference room was already half full when they arrived. Joe took their place at the front, setting up their laptop and connecting it to the projector. As they fiddled with the cables, they could hear snippets of conversation behind them. Is it just me, or does Joe look different today? Yeah, I can't quite put my finger on it. New haircut, maybe? Joe's heart raced. They wanted nothing more than to run out of the room, to hide away until they could figure out how to remove the wig without causing a scene. But as the last few attendees trickled in, including some higher-ups from other departments, Joe knew there was no turning back now. Mark stood up, calling the room to attention. All right, everyone. We're here today for a very important presentation on our new product line. Joe has been working tirelessly on this, and I'm excited to see what they've put together. Joe, the floor is yours. With a deep breath, Joe stepped forward. The weight of dozens of eyes upon them felt oppressive, like a physical force pressing down on their shoulders. They opened their mouth to speak, praying their voice wouldn't betray their inner turmoil.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today.
As Joe launched into their presentation, they found a strange sense of calm settling over them. The familiar slides, the rehearsed words, it all helped to push the wig situation to the back of their mind, if only temporarily. They moved through the material with practiced ease, fielding questions and elaborating on key points. For a brief, shining moment, Joe felt like their old self again, confident and in control. But then it happened. As Joe turned to gesture at a particularly important graph on the screen, they felt a strange sensation on their scalp. A pulling, a stretching, as if the wig was trying to separate itself from their head. Panic flared anew. Joe's words faltered, their train of thought derailing spectacularly. They stood there, mouth agape, as the room fell into an awkward silence.
Joe?
Mark's voice cut through the quiet.
Everything okay?
Joe blinked, suddenly aware of the concerned and confused faces staring back at them. They had to say something, do something, to salvage this situation.
I'm sorry,
Joe stammered, their hand unconsciously reaching up to touch the wig.
I'm not feeling well all of a sudden.
A murmur of concern rippled through the room. Joe could see Mark starting to rise from his seat, a worried frown creasing his forehead. In that moment, Joe made a split-second decision. They couldn't continue like this, pretending everything was normal when it so clearly wasn't. Taking a deep breath, they steeled themselves for what they were about to do.
Actually, there's something I need to tell you all,
Joe began, their voice shaky but determined.
I made a mistake this morning. A big one.
The room fell silent again, all eyes fixed on Joe with rapt attention.
You see, I like to wear wigs sometimes. It's part of who I am, how I express myself. But this morning, in my rush to get ready, I accidentally used Superglue instead of my usual adhesive.
A collective gasp went up from the audience. Joe could see a mix of reactions: shock, confusion, and even a few smiles of amusement.
So, yeah, this wig is pretty much stuck to my head right now,
Joe continued, managing a self-deprecating chuckle.
I was trying to hide it, to just get through this presentation, but I realize now that wasn't the right thing to do. I should have been honest from the start.
For a moment, no one spoke. Joe stood there, heart pounding, waiting for the axe to fall. Would they laugh? Would they be angry? Would this be the end of their career? Then, to Joe's utter amazement, Mark started to laugh. Not a cruel laugh, but a warm, genuine one that seemed to break the tension in the room.
Oh, Joe,
Mark said, shaking his head with a grin.
Only you could get yourself into a situation like this.
Others in the room began to chuckle as well, the atmosphere shifting from tense to almost jovial. I have to say, Sarah piped up from the back, I thought your hair looked particularly fabulous today. This elicited more laughter, and Joe felt a wave of relief wash over them. They weren't being judged or ridiculed. If anything, their colleagues seemed to be rallying around them.
Well,
Mark said, standing up and clapping Joe on the shoulder. I think we can all agree that this presentation has been memorable, to say the least. But Joe, despite this, sticky situation, you were doing a fantastic job. How about we take a quick break and then you can finish up? Unless you'd rather we reschedule? Joe considered for a moment, then shook their head. No, I can finish. Just maybe don't be surprised if I start scratching my head a lot. This drew another round of laughter from the room. As people started to file out for the impromptu break, many stopped to offer Joe words of support or ask questions about their wig-wearing habits. To Joe's surprise, far from being a disaster, their accidental revelation seemed to have broken down some barriers. Colleagues they'd never really spoken to before were now engaging in friendly conversation, sharing their own stories of embarrassing mishaps or expressing admiration for Joe's honesty. As the room emptied, Mark pulled Joe aside. Listen, I know this wasn't how you planned to come out about this aspect of yourself, but I want you to know that we support you. And hey, if anyone gives you any trouble about it, you just let me know, okay? Joe nodded, feeling a lump form in their throat. Thanks, Mark. That means a lot. Now, Mark continued with a grin, let's see about getting you some help with that wig situation. I think Debbie in HR might have some acetone nail polish remover in her desk. It's not ideal, but it might help loosen that glue a bit. As Mark went off in search of Debbie, Joe leaned against the conference table, taking a moment to process everything that had just happened. What had started as a mortifying disaster had somehow turned into a moment of unexpected acceptance and support. They reached up, gingerly touching the wig that had caused so much chaos. It was still firmly attached, a reminder of their morning mishap, but somehow it no longer felt like a source of shame or embarrassment. Instead, it had become a symbol of their journey, a journey of self-expression, honesty, and the surprising understanding of those around them. With a deep breath, Joe straightened up, ready to face whatever came next. They had a presentation to finish, after all, and this time they would do it as their true, authentic self, superglued wig and all. As the break came to an end and people began filing back into the conference room, Joe felt a newfound sense of confidence. The weight of their secret had been lifted, replaced by the warm glow of acceptance from their colleagues. Mark returned, a small bottle of acetone in hand. Here you go, Joe. Debbie says to be careful with it, though. Maybe wait until after the presentation to try anything? Joe nodded, pocketing the bottle with a grateful smile. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. As the last few stragglers took their seats, Joe moved back to the front of the room. The atmosphere had changed noticeably. Gone was the earlier tension, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and shared amusement at the unusual situation. All right, everyone, Joe began, their voice stronger and more assured than before. Let's pick up where we left off. And don't worry, I promise not to get stuck on any points. A ripple of laughter went through the room at the pun. Joe couldn't help but grin, feeling more at ease than they had all morning. As they dove back into the presentation, Joe found that the earlier interruption hadn't derailed their flow at all. If anything, they felt more engaged with their audience, who seemed to be listening with renewed interest. Questions came thick and fast, but not all of them were about the product line. Between inquiries about market projections and distribution strategies, Joe fielded queries about their wig collection, how long they'd been cross-dressing, and whether they had any tips for applying false eyelashes. Rather than feeling invasive, these personal questions felt like genuine attempts to understand and connect. Joe answered them candidly, weaving their responses seamlessly into the professional discussion. Well, Susan, much like how we're proposing a diverse range of products to cater to different market segments, I have a diverse range of wigs for different occasions, Joe explained with a chuckle. And, Tom, mastering the art of false eyelashes is a lot like perfecting our production process. It takes practice, patience, and a steady hand. As the presentation drew to a close, Joe felt a sense of triumph that went beyond just delivering a successful pitch. They had faced their fear, revealed a deeply personal aspect of themselves, and found acceptance in the most unexpected of places. The applause that followed their concluding remarks felt more enthusiastic than usual. As people began to stand and gather their things, many approached Joe to offer congratulations, both on the presentation and on their bravery in sharing their truth. "That was fantastic, Joe," Sarah gushed, giving them a quick hug. "And I meant what I said earlier. That wig really does look great on you. Once you get it unstuck, you'll have to tell me where you got it." Joe laughed, touched by her enthusiasm.
"Thanks, Sarah. I'd be happy to share my wig wisdom with you anytime."
As the room slowly emptied, Mark approached, a broad smile on his face.
"Joe, I have to say, that was one of the most memorable presentations I've ever attended. And not just because of the, hairy situation."
Joe groaned good-naturedly at the pun.
"Thanks, Mark. I'm just glad it didn't completely derail everything."
"Are you kidding? If anything, it made the whole thing more engaging. People were hanging on your every word, and not just to see if the wig would suddenly come off." They both laughed, the earlier tension now nothing more than a distant memory.
"Listen,"
Mark continued, his tone becoming more serious.
"I want you to know that your honesty today was really appreciated. It takes guts to be that vulnerable in front of your colleagues, and I think you'll find that people here are more open-minded than you might have thought."
Joe nodded, feeling a lump form in their throat. I can't tell you how much that means to me, Mark. I've been hiding this part of myself for so long, always afraid of how people would react. To find out that everyone's so accepting, it's overwhelming, in the best possible way." Mark clapped them on the shoulder.
"Well, get used to it. Around here, we value people for their skills, their dedication, and their authenticity. And you, my friend, have all three in spades."
As they gathered up their presentation materials, Joe couldn't help but marvel at how differently the day had turned out from what they had feared. What had started as a nightmare scenario had transformed into a moment of personal growth and professional triumph.
"So,"
Mark said, as they headed towards the door.
"What's your plan now? Going to try that acetone to unstick yourself?"
Joe considered for a moment, then shook their head with a grin.
"You know what? I think I'll leave it for now. After all, I've got a whole office full of people to educate about the finer points of wig maintenance. Might as well use this as a teachable moment, right?"
Mark laughed heartily.
"That's the spirit. Just promise me one thing."
"What's that?"
"Next time you decide to make a bold fashion statement, maybe double-check the adhesive first."
As they walked out of the conference room together, their laughter echoing down the hallway, Joe felt a sense of lightness they hadn't experienced in years. The wig might still be stuck to their head, but gone was the weight of secrecy and fear that had been holding them down for so long. Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!